So hello everyone, and welcome to Harnessing the Potential of Latin American Education Through Digital Learning Tools on High-Flex and Hybrid Environments, a Times Higher Education webinar in partnership with CLASS. My name's Julia Gilmore. I'm the Branded Content Manager for THE, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. Please note that a recording of today's discussion will be available on demand, along with the summary article on the Times Higher Education website, should you wish to revisit this webinar or share it on social media or with colleagues. I'm delighted to be joined today by a panel of experts from academia and industry who are Santiago Belomo, Dean of the School of Education at Universidad Austral, Julio Fernandez, Vice Rector of Universidad Hort Uruguay, David Monson, Head of Latin America at CLASS, and Beatriz Palacios, Educational Innovation and Digital Learning Director at Tecnológico de Monterrey. Those of you in the audience today will be able to put questions to the panel using the Q&A box provided. So we'll try to answer as many of these during the session and we'll leave some time afterwards. Please also feel free to use the chat box provided to share your own experiences and comments. Across Latin America, educational technology has the potential to improve access to education, enhance teaching and learning, and improve student outcomes. However, significant change is needed to bridge the digital divide, as well as to instill a change of culture that enables staff to utilize the benefits of online education delivery. I would now like to hand over to David Monson, Head of Latin America at CLASS, who will give a short presentation to start our discussion. Over to you, David.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and thrilled to be working with Times Higher Education and very valuable organization to partner with. Been very pleased with the collaboration thus far. So let's dive into the topic today. There are two major kind of topics I want to discuss. First, what are students' attitudes towards online learning and hybrid learning now entering the post-pandemic era? And what do institutions think they're going to do about it? And what are some of the challenges that they face as a result? So one sort of big elephant in the room is, when will things get back to normal and what is the new normal? It's definitely the case that if you ask students or teachers, both, about their experience during the pandemic, that you're going to hear a lot of negative answers, that their experience will be characterized by words such as boring or disengaged, or I just had a hard time paying attention. And as a consequence, we saw a precipitous drop. With the drop in engagement, we saw a corresponding parallel drop in academic outcomes. So there was definitely a negative element here to people's attitudes towards online learning and hybrid learning during the pandemic, no question. But the reason I characterize this as a love-hate relationship is that when you dig deeper, when you get kind of past that superficial, as we say in English, knee-jerk reaction, then what you'll find is that students discovered something during the pandemic, and that is that there are certain aspects of that online experience that they really liked. So when you ask them what they want, they will respond and describe something that really can be characterized as hybrid learning, no question. Now that's interesting. On one hand, you get the negative response, and on the other hand, when you really probe and have them describe what they're talking about, they're going to describe hybrid learning. Now, why would that be the case? What is their motivation? What's driving them to ask for hybrid learning? Well, in a follow-up question, it turns out that it's primarily flexibility, that they will, in some ways, live with the limitations of taking traditional pedagogy and putting it on a corporate meeting platform like the one we're using now from Zoom, and all the limitations that come with that in terms of engagement. And they'll live with that if they can have some of the flexibility. So that's really an interesting result, that they want hybrid learning because of the flexibility. Now, that varies depending on student types. Different types of students want different sort of mixes of online versus virtual. We can talk about that in our discussion. Now, also, we should factor into this discussion, well, what is the work environment that students are going to graduate into? So looking at this data from Gallup earlier this year, you can see pre-pandemic versus, let's say, anticipated here in the third column, anticipated location in 22 and beyond versus preferred location. So if you look at fully on site, 60% were fully on site, and that the desired percentage is now into single digits. Now, the reality is not the same as what people desire. The reality they think they're going to go back to is not what they prefer in most cases. And that's going to vary from country to country and how prevalent this trend actually plays out over the next few years. But it's pretty obvious when you combine these two that you're into a pretty high percentage of either exclusively remote or hybrid to some percentage. Now that's remarkable. So we need to take this into consideration as educators and say, well, our education platforms, our ecosystems need to reflect the reality of the collaborative hybrid work environment that students are going to be working in. And we need to create an environment that is similar to prepare them for that work environment. So as a consequence, what are institutions saying? What are they going to do about this? Now, in the data, we see a discrepancy between what, let's say, rectors and presidents of universities versus, let's say, chief online officers or directors of distance learning or others might say. There's a bit of a disconnect there. But most are thinking clearly about hybrid learning. What are we going to do about it? How do we create personalized learning experiences in this hybrid environment? And when asked, what do they see as their single most important barrier? Interestingly enough, they don't say technology. There are companies like Class who are developing, Class, for example, has a platform that is built on top of the infrastructure of Zoom and restores much of the tools and kind of experience that you would expect from a traditional classroom. So we've created sort of a new version of Zoom to create more engagement. So we're solving a lot of the technology problems. But more important than the technology and budget and infrastructure, it turns out people are more and should be more concerned about teacher capability and training and the culture, the resistance to change in this type of a situation. When instructors are required to shift to an online or hybrid environment, it requires that they upgrade their skill set and they learn new techniques for how to manage the classroom, how to monitor attention, how to engage with students. These are skills in an online setting or a hybrid setting that are different and require training and professional development and ongoing sort of quality assurance, continuous quality improvement initiatives that I think are going to have to be put in place in order for this transition to be successful at most institutions. So with that, I think we should open it up for our discussion today and see where things go.
Thanks so much, David. There are some really interesting insights you shared there. And I'd like to begin by asking our university participants, how have attitudes to digital and hybrid learning changed at your institution since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic? So Julio, you're first on my screen, so I'm going to go to you first.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, before the pandemic, we have been working for a very long time with LMS systems, with Moodle, and we have been progressing towards active learning. Our goal was to get professors to be more active in class, to develop activities in their course, so forth. So when the pandemic started, we had to shift all that to the online environment. We were very fortunate that in our country, in Uruguay, there is a very good connectivity infrastructure, and also there is very good availability of equipment for students. But anyway, there are percentiles that may have problems to access things. So we had to kind of do an emergency program to develop infrastructure, to develop, to train our faculty to use the new infrastructure, to work with their homes, because we had a long period of lockdown, not exactly lockdown, but all the universities were closed and we only could work remote. So on this, we eventually developed a high flex mode of working, or hybrid. I think it was Santiago that said yesterday that we need to have a correct definition of what is hybrid, because sometimes it's mixed with the concept of blended learning, which is a different thing. In high flex or hybrid, you basically have a remote group and a local group in the classroom, and both have to be working synchronously. So they have to be able to interact more or less in the same way and perform more or less the same activities. So all that said, after the pandemic, which is now practically ended in my country, now we have about 50% of all the sessions that we teach are hybrid. About 40% are fully presential, and that includes things like chemistry labs, for instance, where you have to have the students there, and about 10% has remained online. Student preference, we measured this during the pandemic in different times. We get about 30% who wanted to return to presential learning as soon as possible, who are bored, we wanted the interaction with students. About 30% that wanted to be online forever because it was more convenient for them. And I think that the thing that was missed the most was the social interaction between students. And I can say that in a personal way. I have been happily married for 45 years, and I met my wife as a classmate at school. And this is something that is harder to do when you are remote. So I think that this more or less to start the discussion. I don't want to monopolize time. So ahead, Julia, and we will be ready for more questions.
Thank you. And Santiago, what's the experience been for you?
It's a pleasure to share this panel, and thank you, Julio, for bringing along the discussion we had yesterday about the need of a conceptual clarification. In our country, Argentina, the concept of hybrid education or hybrid learning, as well as high flex learning, mean simultaneous participation of online and face-to-face students. And blended learning takes into account non-simultaneous stances of online and face-to-face. We have made surveys regularly since pandemic arrived, and we are actually running a poll during these days between students, undergraduate and graduate students. And it's interesting to see some subtle similarities and differences between these two universes. When asked during pandemic about the expectations for post-pandemic learning proposals, half of the undergraduate students declared that they wanted a combination between face-to-face and virtual learning. And as for the other half, only 9% preferred online learning, and more than 4 out of 10 preferred face-to-face interaction. In the ongoing poll, this number remains similar. 56% of the students expect hybrid learning, and only 3% online learning. 4 out of 10 still prefer face-to-face interaction. And within this 56% that prefer hybrid learning, 6 out of 10 would like a combination that privileges face-to-face learning. That's another point. And just to let someone continue, as for graduate students, 60% prefer hybrid instruction, and only 17% wants face-to-face learning. The opinion of professors is much more determined. 74% of the staff prefers hybrid learning, and only 20% face-to-face learning. That was just a discovery in our surveys.
In my institution, Tecnológico Monterrey, we have been working with distance education for more than 30 years. But, well, this prepared us because it was very valuable because it prepared us to allow to have more technologies, more processes, more training programs for the digital world. And in 2015, we decided to expand the concept of digital education, and we integrate more this kind of experience, not only in distance education courses, but also in the face-to-face courses, trying to give the students some experience where they can combine activities online and activities face-to-face. However, the pandemic definitely gave us the opportunity not only to prepare more our professors and our students, but also to give them the experience that they could be successful if they were in an online modality, for example. Also, it gave us the opportunity to show our students and our professors that it could be a good option to have the combination of online and face-to-face activities, trying to find when both of them gave value to their learning process. Today, we are working very hard to define the new strategy for the digital education in our institution. We are defining in which moment of the study of the student will be better to give them hybrid education or online education. Also, we are working to select which kind of models and which kind of content will be able to be in different modalities. And maybe for the next year, we are going to launch this new strategy, and will be very important for us to change the idea for our students and for our teachers that we are not changing the modality of our university. We still are a face-to-face university, but we want to change the idea that introducing this new digital experience is a must, because we have to be prepared for the market, for the labor market, and we have to get the abilities to our students and to our teachers for this new kind of work that is coming after pandemic.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'd like to pick up on a point that Julio raised for my next question, which was, how can you ensure students have the ability to access these online resources in order to learn effectively? Because internet connectivity and access to devices can really vary over regions. Santiago, I might go back to you on that, because Julio mentioned something already, but then I would like everyone's opinion on this.
Thank you. Well, in our country, there is a technical discussion about what is meant by digital poverty, or we call it digital divide. And this discussion should not be underestimated, because there is a tendency to present a dichotomy between students that have or don't have digital skills, and things don't usually present in black and white. There are some gray zones in between. I can share some data about the Argentinian context, if you don't mind. For example, 4 out of 10 students from public secondary schools, that will be our future students, have access to personal computers at their home. And in private schools, the number is doubled, 8 out of 10. The same happens with connectivity. Only 40% counts with Wi-Fi in a range that allows or meets educational needs. And 8 out of 10 students from poor backgrounds access the net through their cell phones, mostly using their personal data packages. So what this provoked in pandemic was that teachers used mostly the tool of WhatsApp to connect with the students, and the second tool mostly used was email. They sent PDFs or Word documents, and that's the way the students remained engaged. So we have a huge problem in our country within these facilities, let's say connectivity or technological tools, and this affects the abilities the students bring to our universities. Let me clarify that in our university, Austral University, we are a private university and our students don't have this problem. They all count on connectivity and they have the tools. So we are in a way better prepared, but this is not the case for the country as a whole.
Definitely. And Beatrice, I'd like to know about the what it's like in Mexico, because you mentioned that you have been utilizing digital learning for a long time. But what do you see as trends in the country overall and at your institution?
Yeah, let me tell you, Julia, that when we started fully remote programs 3 years ago, the technological infrastructure of the country told us that we could not succeed. We had many problems with our students because they don't have abilities to use computers, but also they don't have computers, and also they don't have access to internet. And well, there was another world in that time. However, in that time, we were able to create solutions so that even marginal communities could access our offer. That shows us that there are no limitations. At university, we can create some solutions trying to give the students the opportunity to access these online offers or the digital world, maybe with the limitations of the technology. Already today, we have advanced as a country in infrastructure, but there is still a long way to go to think that we are in the ideal state. However, I think that is not a barrier for our educational models. We have to go ahead and we have to introduce this new kind of model, because I know that infrastructure is a barrier, but not the most important barrier for the education. So we have to go in trying to solve this problem in the future.
And Julia, I'd love your opinion on this as well, because you did mention before that there is actually good connectivity in Uruguay. Although, how do you think that your university specifically has been has excelled in getting people connected?
Well, the first thing you must do is to engage the students and know what are their problems, their actual problems. Then another strategy is to get faculty to use a range of tools. Sometimes you are not able to use online connection like we are doing now, but students may be able to access asynchronous material or to work in other ways, or you may be able to record a lecture or an explanation, and then the students may be able to access at some different time, maybe in an office, maybe in a internet cafe or whatever. So you have to use a range of tools. And the other thing is trying to get your faculty to concentrate on what is important for the students and forget what I will call bells and whistles on entertaining things. So I think that those are the three main strategies that we have used. Eventually, also you need some flexibility as an institution to take into account the circumstances of each student. Mm-hmm. So you are not going to put a bad mark to a student because the student could not access on time or something like that. So this is what I would comment in our case.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And also, online learning isn't just something that affects students, it obviously affects the staff and faculty of universities as well. So how do you think that staff and faculty can be best trained and supported to deliver this world-class sort of digital and hybrid education? And David, I'd love your opinion on this as well. Obviously, class has so much information on this, but I'd love to hear your opinion. So shall I start with you, David, and then we'll hear our university partners?
Sure. I think I thought a lot about this, having worked both in both sides of the table, both the commercial side as well as supporting universities directly as an employee. My experience has been that faculty are resistant to change, and they're fairly conservative in their approach to technology adoption. And so this needs to be done in small increments. It can't be a one and done kind of a project where you pull them in for an afternoon and try to kind of just overwhelm them with lots of things. I think this has to be incremental small steps. In other words, continuous quality improvement needs to be kind of the concept. I think we can take a page out of the book from what I observe here in the US in terms of continuous quality improvement in the healthcare industry. They have a model where they use data and they protect the data. So if you look at something like class generates a lot of data that can be used for learning analytics to understand, well, who's talking, how often do the students talk, are they focused on the application at hand, what content are they using and engaging with, are they engaging with the instructor, with other students through chat or other means, so there's a lot of data to sort of look inside the black box of the course and for the first time really see what's going on there through learning analytics. This offers us a unique opportunity to measure the impact of the changes that we're making. So let's take an example. You've got faculty who are worried about whether students are focusing or not during an online experience like this. Well, in class, you have a little feature next to the participants list, which shows little eyeballs when students disengage and they click on another application and they're now doing something else. So that sort of restores your sight as an instructor to sort of be able to read the room and understand what's happening. So in response to that, you might have been trained with a simple technique to ask for a reaction. Now in Zoom, you can do public reactions where everybody can see what everybody else's reaction is. In class, you can also ask for private reactions. So you can ask a more probing question such as, should I go faster or slower? Now, I don't want to be the student who raises my hand publicly and says, I'm completely lost. I'm confused and disoriented and not, I've disengaged because I don't understand what you're talking about anymore. So I'm just giving up. I don't want to be that student, but I can give a private reaction in class. So a simple technique of monitoring attention levels, that's something new, right? Instructors do that intuitively in a face-to-face environment. They don't have to think about it. It's instinctual. They see people kind of disengaging or talking to their neighbor, and they immediately will respond almost without thinking about it. But they need to be trained to look at a feature like that and then have a technique of engaging and pulling their attention back by asking for a reaction and getting feedback themselves. Now, imagine if that cycle, and then you monitored the data to say, well, did engagement levels from students increase as a result of using that technique over the course of a semester? Now, imagine if you introduced those kinds of techniques pedagogically and technologically, one small incremental step at a time over the course of several years, semester by semester. You would see a marked improvement in the quality of the learning experience for students and the levels of engagement. In comparison, what I often see institutions attempt is to just have a training session and then just kind of walk away and expect that there will be some kind of a change. And so just in summary, I would say, number one, let's use the data now that's available in this hybrid environment to actually measure what's happening through learning analytics. And number two, let's focus on incremental change and a continuous quality improvement process over an extended period of time.
Sick. Julio, I'd love to hear your reaction to what David's been saying and also how you've been facilitating training for these for online learning at your institution.
Well, I quite agree with what David said, because this is something that you have to grow. It's not something that you can buy and install, such as infrastructure. So you have to develop these capabilities in your teachers, in your professors. And that has to be done step by step, maybe a long time. I think it will take maybe 5 or 10 years to fully develop this capability in an institution, even if you have been working before very hard on that, because also professors change, you get new structures. So you have to introduce people to this way of working. One very important why that we have used is to be proactive. In a lecture, you can walk the room and look at faces, but when you have a group online, you have to be proactive. You have to ask them. It's not a good idea to sit in front of the class and say, well, do you understand? Because nobody's going to raise their hand. So you have to ask questions pointedly to each one. And also, I may reflect on something else. All of higher education is a journey into learning how to concentrate, into acquiring discipline. We have to also work on that on the student side, not only on the faculty side. But I quite agree with the approach that David mentioned of the continuous quality improvement, step by step, and most of all, not trying to force anything into the hybrid environment. This is something that has to develop organically.
Fantastic. And Santiago, what would your viewpoint be on that?
Well, I agree to what has been said about this incremental and proactive process of quality assurance. And I also agree about the way to promote not mandatory way the training. The training of staff is struggling in most of our higher education institutions. Let's think about a professor that has been appreciated by the students, successful in teaching for about 20 years in another environment. For him being evaluated and receiving mandatory guidelines is not something he would like. He will be reluctant to obey orders, especially when coming from young ed technicians. Even deans, I am a dean myself, feel uncomfortable when proposing mandatory guidelines. Teachers, professors prefer peer assessment. So in our university, while we continue to deliver training, we are working on a method that we call selfie evaluation. Instead of doing external evaluation, mandatory evaluation, we try to promote a methodology in which professors are the ones who look at themselves in a kind of mirror. We performed a kind of survey that delivers a picture of their strengths and weaknesses in managing the new tools, and that is working fine, because when the staff takes into account and gain awareness of their own strengths and weaknesses, they are more, let's say, open to receiving assessment and training. That is working fine at our university nowadays.
Beatrice, I see you nodding there. Do you agree with what Santiago's been saying? Have you found a bit of kind of pushback from maybe slightly more experienced professors in this new way of learning?
Yeah, well, I think that we must work with a change of culture in our universities, where our teachers can see that the modality does not matter. The most important thing is mastery of the didactics, the content, and the teaching process. The integration of new technologies and pedagogies that ensure digital experience is something that teachers can master if we help them to discover in which elements of their methodology it offers value. To the extent that we prepare teachers to enter the world of digital experience, not as a parallel universe, I think it will be easier for them. We should give the professors training on these new technologies and forms of teaching but always offering them the confidence of the value that their own experience and mastery of their methodologies continues to have. I think that maybe it will be easy to say, but I think that it's important for universities to work in that, because the professor will be very important part of the success of the future of this introduction of digital education in our universities.
Fantastic. We've already touched on this slightly with kind of, especially what David said about the way that class can facilitate, students asking questions and the way that staff can interact with students and see how students are doing. But I wanted to ask, how can collaboration between students and faculty, as well as between institutions and between industry, be facilitated through digital education tools?
Well, just going back to our previous topic really quickly before we transition, I wanted to add one thing. On the topic of culture change and instructors, kind of building on what has been said regarding faculty and their reluctance in some cases to approach this problem, I think it's really important. I mentioned earlier the idea of continuous quality improvement, or CQI. It's employed in the healthcare industry here in the United States. And what happens is the data in that context of evaluation. So Santiago was mentioning the concept of like peer evaluation. So the idea of the data, or the data in that conversation, or the data generated by something like class, needs to be closely guarded and be held in a very private, in a very specific context. Otherwise, this is going to get very negative very quickly, very 1984 Big Brother is watching you kind of a culture, and that would backfire tremendously. So the way we use this type of data has to be very carefully monitored, so as to be something that's very private to the instructor, so they personally have the information that they need to understand, what's actually happening on the other side of the screen, because they have that visibility in the face-to-face classroom and they adapt accordingly. It's very difficult to really understand the dynamics in a virtual environment. So if we can restore that information to them, but we don't want that to become a public flogging, right? Or a public kind of hanging, kind of a scenario for instructors. So I think we have to be, in the healthcare industry in the US, what they do is they actually protect it legally, so that data generated in that evaluatory environment is protected from even being used in a legal environment for lawsuits. I mean, it is legally locked down. I think we need to do something similar through policy at our institutions to say, yes, we are going to employ this data. We're going to open the black box, but we're going to let you look inside the black box. We're not going to have everyone looking in the black box of your course. We're going to give you visibility, because that'll help you decide which of these strategies to employ and how effective are they. And when you make incremental small changes, is it effective or not? So I think that's an important culture thing that we need to take into consideration very early on in this process. Otherwise, if we try to introduce these types of tools and we do it the wrong way, it may be a decade before we recover from the negative backlash that we generate. So moving back to your transitioning now to the other topic, I think if you look at today's world, things are changing very rapidly. I mean, first there was the pandemic, and that's changed the way regional supply chains are going to operate. They're going to go from a kind of a globalized context to more of a regional context. And I think that's not a temporary change. I think if anything, it's going to, now with things like what's happening in Ukraine and the likely consequences of how that will play out in other parts of the world, it's going to create more regional economies. That's going to force industries within regions of the world to adapt and evolve even more quickly. Things are going to change than they have, which was already a very rapid pace of change. So I mean, you already had trends like artificial intelligence and things automating certain jobs out of existence. So that means industry and higher education, or education systems in general, need to have an even stronger alignment to be able to adapt academic programs to meet the needs of industry. And I think this modality of hybrid learning gives us an opportunity to be more flexible, not less flexible, and how we adapt and move forward. Traditional asynchronous courses, like when people thought of online courses prior to the pandemic, they were predominantly asynchronous. You were sort of working on your own. Asynchronous courses are much more expensive to develop and deliver, and they're harder to update and maintain. Therefore, they're less flexible versus a hybrid course, which is more like a traditional teaching environment where an instructor can see a news item the night before and bring that information right into the classroom the next day. That's one of the advantages of having a hybrid experience and having your teachers capable of that, is they can be very dynamic and responsive to what's happening around them, both in their field and in the world. So I think inherently using hybrid technology, hybrid courses will maintain the dynamism that we're used to in the traditional face-to-face environment.
Yeah, and I'd love to know our university participants' experience of that. Do you think it is possible to retain that dynamism of face-to-face teaching through online learning? Santiago?
So we are moving to another question, I think.
Yes.
Right.
So I think going off what David just said, yes,
okay.
I think I'd like to discuss kind of how you can make online learning as dynamic as face-to-face.
Yes, I feel that there is a challenge in two different and complementary directions. The first challenge has to do with the fact that students became more demanding when it comes to face-to-face teaching methods. They don't want to go to the campus to take a lesson that can be taken on the platform by streaming, for example. Teachers need to guarantee that the physical presence in the classroom really adds value, and that means that they must propose better methodologies and practice. At the same time, there is a huge challenge within first years of undergraduate studies. Many of the new students lack the necessary self-regulation to perform well in online environments. They need autonomy, and they don't necessarily have it. On our surveys, only 40% of students declare that they can pay full attention during a class, an online class. And this average is even lower when we ask about participating in online environments or keeping motivated, not only during a class, but during an entire course. They also declare that they have difficulties to organize themselves. So we are facing another dimension of let's call digital poverty of wealthy students, because they feel poor in certain skills that should be conveniently addressed and developed in order to take full profit of online learning. And this poverty is clearly connected to future employability, because self-regulation, organization skills, autonomy, and so on are abilities needed for any kind of labor nowadays. That's my reflection on this.
Okay. Julio, do you have anything to add to that? I think I definitely want to discuss the fact that digital education can facilitate learning of skills for future employment. Is this something you found, that students are lacking in certain skills or feel that they are poorer in some way for lacking these digital skills?
In our country, we have an important information technology industry, and lots of people are working remote, even before the pandemic. So remote working is, I won't say it's the most common way, but it certainly is predominant in some industries already. So many students may be already working in that way. So the challenge is not so much to get students to adopt the online learning, but to do something that is meaningful for them in the online learning, to get their attention, to maintain their concentration and to be able to perform activities that are needed in the course. I would say that is the key to it. For the instructor, it will always be a struggle because now you have two groups, and before you had only one. So I don't think that ever hybrid is going to be as easy as face-to-face or even to just online. And in fact, one thing that we are noticing in hybrid sessions is that students tend to converge to one of the modalities. They were predominantly online or predominantly face-to-face. They may switch once or twice during the semester because of, I don't know, some work activity or family issue or something, but they usually try to work in one of the two modes. So I think that the jury is still out on this. And we have to keep a close eye on this to see how it evolves. Because in the end, we will have to do what the students need and want in order to have them in the university.
Beatrice, what do you think about what our other two panelists have said? How have you found tracking what students want, and how have you been implementing what they want and what they need?
Yeah, well, I think that for the future in our universities will be very important to introduce this new kind of technologies and methodologies using technology, not only because it will help us to give a new kind of offer to our students. I think that in the future for you, our universities will be very important to develop the abilities that the digital learning give the students. We can try to give students more possibilities to understand the self-learning, the communication using these new technologies, also how they can manage their time. There are many abilities around the digital education. We have to introduce and try to use these possibilities in our education models. So introducing this new kind of education will help us to prepare our students for the real world. Because when they are going to the world, they will be asking to have this ability to work online, to communicate with others in other countries. So it's the opportunity for our university to prepare, really prepare the students for that future.
Fantastic. And I'd like to ask David, actually, how do you think skills education can be embedded to online teaching and learning to kind of boost these student outcomes and employability?
Well, I think the best strategy is to employ them as an instructor. I mean, the more you actually use these collaborative tools effectively, the more students will reflect back those same strategies and techniques and skills when they see them employed by instructors. As Julio said, when you're dynamic and you're reaching out to them and you're engaging them regularly through either content that you're giving them to interact with, or a survey, or asking for reactions, or breaking them up into small groups, whatever the strategy may be, as you employ those regularly and keep them engaged, they will more likely reflect and employ those same skills in their teaching collaboration experiences.
Fantastic. And what do our university participants think about what David's just said? Julio, I'd like to go to you first.
Well, yes, if you embed in your course, if you use these techniques in your course, the students will obviously go to learn them. During the pandemic, for instance, in my own course, I had to show students which application they should use to take notes, to write in a tablet, to do an equation. So we had to introduce this during the pandemic, and it has helped us very much, very much. I think it's very important what Beatriz said, that we are not only teaching the students what is in a course, but we are giving them additional abilities. to interact in a world that is going to be, I don't know if hybrid, online, a mixture of both, face-to-face, but the central ability of concentration, of learning to use new tools, or being able to adapt to change, those are central abilities that we definitely have to include in what we do.
Definitely. And Beatrice, what do you think?
Well, I think that I answered before,
Yeah.
but I only can tell to all the audience that I think that for the future, the most important thing for our universities will find the kind of ability that the student will be asking to have, because our students are coming and they are asking to have new abilities. And we have to be prepared to plan in our offer the development of these new abilities. Use educational education and digital education, and you will find many of the answers that their students are asking today.
And Santiago?
Well, I agree on what has been said by everyone. The subject of the future of work, the skills needed for the works of the future, let's say, has been fully treated. In our country, in Argentina, it is important to take into account the background we are talking about, because we have a lot of students coming from the secondary schools that lack basic skills, such as the capacity to communicate themselves, or to comprehend a text, or having a basic logical abilities of thinking. So we are talking about things that should come before the skills needed just to perform well online. They are skills needed to perform well on every situation or environment. So I think that the challenge is doubled, because we have to develop these skills needed for online employment, for example, as it was said, and at the same time to recover what has been not developed in previous situations. That's a huge challenge we have in our country.
What do you think is the best way to combat that challenge, to kind of get the younger students, the secondary school students? How do you think you can best help them?
I think we have to make focus on little things, and perform with what Julia said about being, and David also, a progressive and quality-based, with a quality assurance system to do tiny steps in order to achieve the goals needed, but not pretend all at the same time, because I think that is the beginning of the failure. We have to prioritize the needs and make a lot of focus.
Yeah. Beatrice, I saw you nodding there. Is that something that you're concerned about as well?
Yeah, I agree with Santiago. I think that for the students must be like a normal process. It's like when we are teaching them something new, for them it's naturally that we are going to give them new abilities. So introducing this new kind of education, this new kind of using technology, it has to be like something so smooth going into the life of the student. I don't know, we have to go more quickly, Santiago. It's the only thing I think that maybe we have to go more quickly, because the new war is right now here. So maybe we have to be more quickly, but trying to give the student the opportunity to assimilate this new kind of education.
Julio,
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask about what Beatrice said. I agree with her. we have to go quickly, and technology helps a lot on that. For example, when talking about the development of comprehensive or comprehension skills, technology helps. There are a lot of apps that teachers can use to help students to, for example, learn how to read, and they can measure the amount of words they can read on a minute time. So that are great tools that help to make the development faster and more rapidly. I agree on that.
I would say also the pandemic showed us that we can move quickly sometimes. So we have to keep the momentum going on that and introduce whatever we think that will add value to our education.
Definitely. Thank you. Well, we have one question in the Q&A box, and please, our audience, feel free to submit more. This question, I think, would be a good one for David to answer, which is, what is the difference between hybrid learning and blended learning? Most of the times, these two concepts are used as synonyms. So I think we've used both, but is there any way to kind of give people a definitive answer on if it's on hybrid versus blended?
Not, because the terms are used differently depending on who you're talking to. Now, blended, so and they've also shifted both from what people understood them to mean pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Now, one thing that we have seen is blended learning before the pandemic generally meant just the simple fact that I've got a traditional classroom environment supported asynchronously by a learning management system, that was kind of a blended environment. And hybrid, it assumed that there was some virtual component, but it wasn't necessarily synchronous. Now, in today's world, post-pandemic, when people say hybrid, more often than not, they're thinking about this type of virtual synchronous experience being part of the learning experience. But it still varies tremendously whether or not you have a mix of face-to-face students with virtual students at the same time, or whether you're just dividing the experience to say, well, on Monday and Wednesday, we're going to meet face-to-face, and Fridays, we're going to meet virtually, and you just keep the two worlds separate. So that could also be hybrid for some people. Now, there's a new term called high flex, just to add confusion, which is more precisely defined as kind of everything for everyone. It's like, as a student or an instructor, I can participate either virtually or face-to-face at any given time, or synchronously or asynchronously at any given time. It's sort of like we just do everything for everyone. Like high flex is just, you just maximize everything. I think what we should be paying more attention to is the quality of the experience, regardless of the modality that's chosen. Now, I certainly think the most difficult transition that we're going to be making moving forward is mixing physical students with virtual students in the same environment. That is the big challenge. Class is researching and developing features and things specifically to address the mechanics of that, to make it easier for instructors, because that's the biggest barrier right now. It's just such an awkward experience. You have to, so for example, in class, one of the challenges is we present a lot of information that's private to the instructor. Well, if you want to show the list of virtual participants to your students, you can't just copy your desktop and broadcast that to the students, because it's showing all this private information that only you should have access to. So one of the features that we've added in the recent version is to be able to pull off like the gallery on a separate screen, and it just shows just the students and their public reactions, for example, or if they've raised their hand. But it doesn't show things like the tools that monitor whether or not they're paying attention, for example. You don't want to be showing that data to all the students. So these are the types of awkward things that have to be figured out, and they're only going to be figured out in the context of people actually trying trial and error, and companies like Class responding, rapidly, pivoting and adjusting and adding features. But it's happening very, very quickly. I mean, we released these features in beta recently at a conference in Australia. We already found that there were several universities that were using them in beta live. At the time, we thought we were just presenting them as a new thing that they could think about using, and they were already they'd already deployed them. That's how urgently they were needed. So it's interesting how quickly people are picking this up. But it's a scary thing. There's no question, and there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah. And there is no agreement, sorry.
Yeah.
I think maybe Times Higher Education can help us to make like a meeting where we can collaborate to create the final definition of hybrid education, blended education, because there are many meanings in the world of these two kind of education. So I think this is a big challenge. So for the next meeting, we can talk about that.
Let me introduce an anecdote. At our university, we needed during pandemic to create a glossary of terms in order to just be able to communicate between ourselves, because we were using the same word in different with different meanings. So inside any university and between university, what Beatriz was saying is quite a necessity.
Yes, we had to do the same, Santiago, and we had a long discussion about that official glossary that finally our rector sent the final version on mail and said, this is what we are going to use.
Okay.
But yes.
Well,
We
thank
should
you
share
so
our glossaries.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our discussion. I know we could probably sit around talking for even longer, but I'd like to thank everyone for taking part today, especially our amazing panel, and remind you all that there will be an on-demand recording and of the discussion and a summary article available on the Times Higher Education website in due course. So we hope that you found today useful, and we really hope to be able to engage with you again at future Times Higher Education events. So thank you very much and goodbye.